it's just like riding a bike. Now, that's a phrase we're all familiar with. It's just like riding a bike. And what we're talking about there is that you're doing some kind of activity and you're not sure if you'll remember how to do it again. And people use that phrase, well, it's just like riding a bike, because if you hadn't ridden a bike a while, you go back to it, pretty well comes to you rather quickly. Now, the interesting phenomenon is that we're talking about that there is something that is commonly used but not fully understood. And that is the function known as muscle memory, today on the Personalized Fitness Podcast. Good day and welcome to the Personalized Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Williamson, president of Personalized Fitness. Thank you so much for joining me today and covering this particular topic. This is yet like all of them, and the reason we put together the podcast, which is dispelling the myths of health, fitness, and wellness. This is one that is this commonly misunderstood. Now, if you have any questions about this particular podcast or any others, or if you have an idea for a podcast, something that you're interested in knowing more about, please feel free to reach out to me at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach me at my email address, which is Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. That is also our website, and of course, our Facebook page, Personal Edge Fitness. Hit me up on Twitter at TeamPE. Now, I also need to make an apology to a longtime listener. Gene had asked about had asked us about doing a podcast on creatinine levels and also creatine. And in my research on that, I realized that I didn't want to rush that particular one because there's a lot of information there, and it's a very, very, very common topic. In fact, the same time that Gene was asking me about that, I had somebody else ask me about the same topic. So we're going to wait till later to put that one together and possibly bring in a professional on that. So that is coming. But this is one that I was working with a client just this past week, and we were doing a particular exercise, one that I like using a lot. In fact, another one that I'm going to feature on a podcast, and it's a balance agility exercise that I do using steps. And one of the comments that this new client mentioned was, "Oh, of course, that's like muscle memory," and I realized there that term gets used a lot. I hear people say muscle memory a lot. I've got clients up and down the scale, ages, athletes, seniors, what have you, that talk about muscle memory. And I thought it good to do a podcast on that to explain kind of what muscle memory is, especially, I'm going to start off with this, as how that differs in the brain as compared to balance, because balance is something I talk a lot about. And especially the fact that balance is not dictated by a number on a calendar. And you, of course, know that I don't think many things are dictated by a number on a calendar. But balance is something that that your body learns, and it can go dormant. Let's say that. It can go dormant because of lack of activity, but you can bring every single bit of it back unless you have some sort of damage to the brain. And but balance I talk about is actually in the brain. It's not located in the body. You can have weaknesses that can affect your balance, but true balance is actually located in the brain. Well, so is muscle memory. And the difference is that balance is controlled by the cerebellum. Cerebellum is responsible for motor control. Now, I'm going to simplify this because we can go real deep into this subject, but just for simplicity's sake, cerebellum controls motor control. Basically, that's its job, is motor control, among other things. It has to do with language and whatever, but the most studying that is being done on this particular part of the brain, which is located at the base of the brain, and is actually very small compared to the cerebrum, the larger part of the brain. Most of the research on that has been on movement and on motion, and that is, of course, motor control is what the cerebellum does. So that's balance. But where does muscle memory come in? Well, actually, muscle memory, if you think about it, since it does have something to do with motor control, the cerebellum is involved. But the other part of the brain this is what makes it makes the difference between muscle memory and balance memory, if you will, is that in the muscle memory, the motor cortex part of the brain is involved in muscle memory. Now, what is the motor cortex? Where is it located? What's it do? Again, simplicity, it's basically in the top part of the brain. There are a few different parts of it, but motor cortex is basically where the impulses, where the movement initiates. The motor cortex is the part of the cerebral cortex in the brain where the nerve impulses originate that initiate voluntary muscle movement. So motor cortex is where it starts. And basically, after it starts, says, okay, this is what we're going to do. It sends it to the cerebellum to control it. So sort of like a captain may plot the course, but then the navigator controls how the navigation is going. And that's basically the captain of the ship being the motor cortex and the cerebellum being the navigator. And so that's the difference between those two. And that might have only been in my cerebrum that I was thinking that way. But if you're a fan of the podcast and you've heard me talk a lot about balance, well, then you may be interested, like I was, in knowing, okay, well, what's the difference between balance and muscle memory? Now, getting a little deeper into what is muscle memory. Muscle memory is, and I used the analogy in the introduction there about falling off or riding a bike. And muscle memory deals with the ability for your body and your brain to remember basically how to do a function, how to send the same communication to a part of the body in order to repeat that function. Typing on a keyboard, that's muscle memory. You know, once you learn the QWERTY keyboard and you learn the AS, you know, if I can remember it, I have to look at my keyboard for this. This is ridiculous. ASDF. JKL Sim, like we learned in typing class, and then you start learning where all the different keys are, and you realize that once you've gotten out of typing class, here I am having to repeat something that I heard 1,000 times in 8th grade in typing class, and I had to actually look at my keyboard. Now, if I were to go to type, though, at 54 years old, it's been years since I've been in a typing class, I can do it really, really quick without a problem whatsoever because of muscle memory. And that's what muscle memory is, and it goes into it works into aspects of agility. The stair activity that I'm going to do a podcast on and actually show you video of that. I use that to increase this for 4 reasons. Basically, I use it for strength development and the legs, also hip development, but balance and agility. Basically, working on the brain and working on balance. And then, of course, the last it happens to be the anaerobic capacity. But the reason I bring up that exercise is there's 4 different ways that we go up and down the stairs and actually change the foot pattern to the feet going side by side, standing sideways on the step, to crossing the foot over in the front, and actually doing a full karaoke or full grapevine, if you've done those on the athletic field, up the stairs. Now, that is the clients that I have do that without fail. The more we do that, the more it becomes easier for them, and the whole trick is to go faster and faster. And the reason they're able to do that, again, it's a repetitive action. It happens to be that's muscle memory. The example that the client that gave me the idea for basically to do this podcast used was he's a pilot, and he was talking about the controls in his newer plane, and he said that his new plane he has a different way of working his controls. It changed the way he was doing it from his old plane. And from what I understand, the older plane, the controls were up high. And he can do that almost blindly now because of muscle memory. And now he has to switch, even though he's been a pilot for years, he knows how to fly a plane. This is nothing, the more advanced plane actually has easier controls compared to his older plane. He finds it more difficult because he's having to retrain that brain, so his motor cortex is having to initiate new movements, and his cerebellum is having to learn them. And this is why this is why a lot of people didn't switch phones for a long time. They were used to that keyboard, and to go to a touchpad type of system and use a different type of pattern as far as typing, even though it may be quote unquote easier. It wasn't easier for those individuals that were used to like a BlackBerry and doing a thumb type texting, because it's muscle memory that makes it so easy for them. So let's get into a little bit more about muscle memory. Excuse me. What I found interesting about this, and it's something I didn't know until I really started investigating it, because it's something I do a lot of, because I teach a lot of balance and agility work, and especially with our athletes, but also with our seniors, we do a lot of balance work. We use a lot of repetition. A lot of repetition to make things easier. Hitting a speed bag. For example, there's very little instruction that goes along with hitting a speed bag. Now, I may have some boxing enthusiasts out there that disagree with me, but basically learning the initial way to the beginning of hitting a speed bag, being able to hit it and doing certain repetitions and get a rhythm, what have you. There's some basic instruction that we typically use in teaching that. And I actually learned that from a fantastic boxing coach. You know, keeping the hands up high, keeping the elbows high, and repeating and making sure you're doing the same movement with the hands, and not dropping your arms so you're messing up the timing. After that, I mean, that's basically the instruction with it. After that, it's just repetition, repetition, repetition. But what I found in studying about muscle memory is that when you really do develop muscle memory, it's not from repetition as much as it is from rest. Now, see what I mean? Now, we talk about this in muscle development. You know, you heard me say before that a physical therapist, a personal trainer, working on muscles, all we're basically doing is we're breaking down muscle tissue. We may be increasing range of motion by stretching a leg or doing some kind of flexibility work, but when it comes to getting you stronger, we're not actually building a muscle. We're breaking it down. And I've said before that where you really grow is you grow outside of the facility. You grow at rest because you're breaking down the muscle tissue and your body says, okay, wait a second. Evidently, that muscle wasn't strong enough. We're going to need to build it back because it's damaged. And you know, since it wasn't strong enough last time, let's build it back stronger. And that's how you actually grow. So you actually grow during rest. Well, I was surprised to find out that muscle memory is much the same. You challenge the brain, you challenge the motor cortex to come up with those new movements. You challenge the cerebellum to learn to control them. And where they really do make a difference and where they really do grow is when you're not doing the activity. Now, I'll tell you how that is, and it's kind of fascinating. They've done a lot of studies on this, and I'll tell you about one particular one they did. But what happens is your brain, when you're learning these exercises, this particular challenge, your brain's moving at a certain speed as far as developing the new impulses in the motor cortex and the cerebellum trying to learn how to control it. It runs that pattern that you're trying to learn at a certain speed. But what was interesting that researchers have found, and they've used some really fantastic equipment to do this because they're studying the brain when they're doing this, is that once you've gone through that activity, maybe once, maybe twice, and what have you, once you're away from that activity, your brain has found a new challenge now. And so what it's doing, it starts racing through that pattern at 20 to 30 times faster than when you're doing the activity itself. So the best way to actually train for it is to run the activity, take a break from it, come back and run the activity again. Now, I mentioned that they've done some studies on this. One of the studies they did was on some rats that they were teaching the rats a new maze they'd done before, and what they found out is that at rest, in fact, at sleep, the rats' brains were still going through the maze, and they were going so fast that they almost had to estimate how much faster they were running because the brains were running the sequences so fast they almost couldn't keep up. But they figured it was almost 30 times faster running that same maze through the brain, basically wearing that neuro pathway. Now that's a Garrett term, that's a Garrett analogy, but it's like a path in the woods. It's all grown up, but you keep walking that path, pretty soon that path gets worn down. I use that analogy to explain how the neural pathways end up developing. And so the rats' brains were actually running at 30 times. So, you know, when they got up the next morning, they were actually able to run the maze much faster and figure it out a lot quicker. Well, our brains work the same way. And we actually start to develop the pattern far better when we're resting. Just a reminder, and I'm going through a lot of this quickly because it's a lot of information, and I try to break it down simply. But if you have any questions about this or interested in any more, please contact us at 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. Be glad to go deeper into the subject. Well, okay, if we're trying to develop muscle memory, and the interesting thing about it, the one thing I found just limited information on was on how long do you keep muscle memory. And it seems to be that unless you have some sort of damage in the brain, just like riding a bike, you keep muscle memory pretty much for life, for the entire existence of the brain. Well, there were some studies that I read that were interesting about. They looked at one particular subject. They called him HM, who had a stroke that had damaged part of his brain, and it was causing amnesia. Found out that you cannot develop new memories. He would do something, and then an hour later, he would forget that he ever did it, and that progressed. Day after day after day, they were doing these tests on his muscle memory, and they would find out that he didn't even remember doing the test, and he did it the day before. But what they did find out, which was fascinating, was that his body did develop muscle memory. He would shock himself about some of the things he was doing and how fast he was doing them because he didn't remember doing them. But that part of the brain had not been damaged, so therefore the motor cortex, the cerebellum, were remembering, though he wasn't in his prefrontal cortex. They were actually remembering the patterns that he was doing, which I thought was fascinating. So, okay. This is almost like a quick hit because I'm diving deep, not doing a deep dive into this because and it would just be, I feel like that it would be overkill on it because basically what do you need to understand to improve muscle memory? Now this can be done for athletes, obviously. It can be done for anybody learning any kind of task. And, of course, one of my favorite demographics to work with is seniors. And, to enhance muscle memory, learning new tricks or to improve balance, something I would like to be interested in developing new different activities they've never done before. A karaoke, a grapevine, a walking upstairs sideways, a balance beam, catching a ball. These are things that are developing new neural pathways in the brain and things that I'd like to do. So whether it's an athlete, whether you're just trying to learn how to do something, a new dance step or whatever, or if you're trying to regain function in the brain, regain function in the body through balance, the way to work that is first exercise. Go through the activity itself. Go through it slow. Don't try to race through it. This is a challenge I have when I'm working with people with balance. If I put them on the beam, quickly the goal comes into mind of I got to get to the other end of the beam. And they want to race through it or they want to hold on half of the time. No, take it slow. Go through the activity slow. This is the same thing I have when I do my stair technique and stair training is that people try to go through it too fast. The best thing for the brain to learn, that's what you're teaching here, you're teaching the brain. For the brain to learn is to slowly go through the activity so that your brain starts to learn the pattern. Then after you've gone through it once or twice, step away from it. No matter if you I didn't do it good, I want to wait till I do it good. No, step away from it. Step away from it for a matter of time. And they weren't really clear on the matters of time, but it did seem that the more time you spent away from it, that the more times your brain actually ran through that pattern. But like we do when we're doing the stair drill, we'll go through that with somebody once, maybe twice, and then we'll to initiate the pattern. Then we'll go do some exercises. Go do a superset of 2 or 3 exercises for 3 sets. Then we'll come back, and invariably, it's funny when I read about this, I started thinking through the athletes and the clients of mine that I had worked through this pattern, and every time they go back, it's better. Even though they weren't sitting there, you would think, well, of course, they're doing it for they're now doing it the 3rd time, so it should be better. Well, that's true, but too many times, coaches and the dangerous part of this, I feel, are parents that are trying to coach that know nothing about developing an athlete, feel like, okay, the way to get better is to do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again. Well, if you're trying to learn a particular task, it's better to do it a few times, take some time off, do it a few times, take some time off. That way it's going to develop faster at rest than it is doing the activity. And I hate to get to the ugly side of this, but too many times I've seen athletes being punished by doing something over and over again. And when they mess up, they add, do it 20 more times. And they mess up again. Okay, do it 30 more times. It's best to take time away and allow the brain to start running that pattern faster, more times than when you're actually doing that activity, so that the brain learns it. And so first, do the exercise. Second, take time off from it. And then third, go back to it. And if you're doing something and you and you're learning a new pattern, you're trying to learn a new skill, and you're doing that interval of exercise, rest, exercise, rest. Well, come back the next day and see how much better you'll do, because now you've literally slept on it. Your brain has started to run those patterns during rest, during sleep, a lot faster, and I bet you money you're going to end up being better at it. So first, exercise, repeat. Exercise, rest, repeat. Continue to that pattern. Sleep on it. And the third thing when I tell you about increasing muscle memory is, as always, drink water. Now, if you go back to my podcast that I did on the relationship of water to dementia, you find that our thoughts are things, and thoughts actually occur in a liquid environment. And the doctor that I told you about that wrote the book, Your Body's Many Cries for Water, talked about the fact that he was able to treat early onset dementia with just water. After years of being dehydrated, we'd actually damage that part of the brain. And if you are at the early stages of it, you can increase memory function, you can increase mental function, brain function, by increasing hydration, because now the brain is not dehydrated. The brain uses 30% of the water that you drink is used by your brain. So if you're trying to improve muscle memory and trying to learn a new skill, well, like with many of things that I talk about, muscle development, memory, weight loss, everything, just add water. It's amazing how many times this particular nutrient comes up, and it always makes me thirsty when I do. How much water? Well, I'm going to tell you, it's 100 ounces a day, every single day of your life, recommended by the National Institute of Health, American Heart Association, American Medical Association, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Cooper Clinic, Harvard Medical, Stanford Medical. Yes, I can go on. So the last part of that, first, exercise. Actually go through the exercise. Second, rest and repeat, and extended rest. And the third is, of course, hydration. Now, I like this particular topic. If you have any more questions about it, please feel free to contact me at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach me at Garrett, Garrett, at Personal Edge Fitness. That's also our Facebook page and our website. Hit me up at Team PE on Twitter if you are so inclined. Muscle memory. It's for everybody, and it can be improved. It can be it can be challenged. It can be improved. It's there for life. You keep it for life, and it happens to be just one more way we help you reach your level of wellness. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to speaking to you next week.